Hey everyone! In today's video, we're exploring the thrilling Haxo Gambit, a sharp and daring opening that can catch your opponent off guard and give you the initiative from the very first moves. Begin the game by pawn from to e4. Black usually replies by pushing the pawn to a5. You then develop the knight from to f3, and black commonly answers with the knight to c6. Rather than playing the quiet developing move with the bishop to c4, choose a much more ambitious plan. Push the pawn to d4, deliberately offering it as a sacrifice. This move creates two immediate ideas at once. You challenge black's central pawn, and you also prepare the possibility of advancing to d5 later, which would drive away the knight sitting on c6. In the majority of games, black accepts the offer and captures the pawn on d4. Instead of rushing to win it back, you concentrate on speeding up your development and activating your pieces to generate pressure. A key follow-up is bringing the bishop to c4, aiming directly at the sensitive f7 square. This gambit is powerful because it is packed with hidden tactical tricks. Many normal-looking replies from black contain subtle mistakes that can quickly lead to losing material or coming under a dangerous attack. Even in the rare cases where black avoids every trap, white still reaches a comfortable position with active pieces and strong central control without taking any real strategic risk. The move chosen most often by black here is developing the bishop to c5. On the surface, this seems sensible. A piece is developed, and the extra pawn on d4 remains protected. In reality, this placement gives white several concrete chances to seize the initiative and put black under immediate pressure. Another frequent reply is developing the knight to f6, which looks very solid. Against this setup, you can transition into a strengthened and more dangerous version of the well-known fried liver attack, pushing the classical attacking concept even further. This continuation leads to sharp play where black must defend very precisely. Let us first look at black's most common setup, developing the bishop to c5. This appears sensible because it activates a piece and protects the pawn on d4 for a second time, giving the impression that winning it back is no longer possible. Instead of fighting for the pawn immediately, you quietly play the pawn to c3, preparing to develop the knight from b1 after exchanges in the center. This move also tempts black into a serious error. Very often, black captures with the pawn to c3, believing this removes future dangers and avoids complications. In reality, this capture is a decisive mistake. Rather than recapturing, you unleash a tactical shock. The bishop sacrifices itself on f7. This idea is the heart of the gambit and appears in many related positions. After black accepts the sacrifice, you continue with the queen to d5, creating a deadly double attack on the exposed king and the bishop on c5. You immediately win back the bishop, but now black's king is dragged into the open and becomes extremely vulnerable. Most opponents respond by moving the king to e8 or king to f8. Although king to f8 looks ugly, it is actually the most resilient choice. Even so, black is left with a shattered position and must defend against a powerful attack for the rest of the game. The striking and entertaining part of this variation is that nearly all of black's natural responses end badly. To defend properly, black would need deep, advanced ideas that most players cannot find over the board. If black moves the king to e8 to avoid an immediate check, the king becomes trapped in the center, highly exposed to attacks. Instead of capturing the bishop on c5 right away, a stronger plan is to deliver an intermediate check with the queen to h5. This check usually forces black to play pawn to g6 to block, which weakens their kingside structure and sets up even stronger attacking chances. After this pawn push, you can safely capture the bishop on c5, gaining material while leaving black's king vulnerable and unable to castle. This sequence is very common in this line and consistently gives white a dominant position. The exposed king, combined with active pieces, allows you to continue a powerful offensive without giving up anything. If black captures your pawn on b2, it only makes your position stronger. This allows your bishop to become a long-range powerhouse, especially now that the pawn sits on g6 instead of g7, giving you excellent attacking opportunities on the king side. The reason the intermediate check with the queen to h5 was so crucial is that it forces black to push the pawn to g6, weakening their kingside defenses and giving you opportunities to continue the attack. Even if black decides not to capture the pawn on b2, it does nothing to solve their central problems. The king remains stranded in the center, unable to castle, and extremely vulnerable. If black makes any other move, you can simply capture the pawn on c3 with the queen, maintaining pressure on the rook on h8 and keeping black on the defensive. Once you have control of this part of the board, you can safely castle yourself, connecting your rooks and continuing development. The attack can be further reinforced by bringing the bishop to g5, pinning black's knight on f6 and tying down their pieces. Your queen continues to dominate key squares, and at the right moment, you can bring a rook to a 1 and push the pawn from e4 to a 5, opening the e-file and preparing a decisive assault on black's exposed king. To illustrate how devastating this plan can be, consider a typical game from this line. Black tried to activate their rook from h8 to f8, hoping to remove it from immediate danger. White responded aggressively by moving the bishop to h6, attacking the rook. When black shifted the rook to safety, white played the knight to g5, threatening it again. Black, realizing the king on e8 had no safe refuge and the queen on d8 could not protect the knight on f6, awkwardly moved the rook to d7 in an attempt to untangle. White continued the plan by playing rook to e1, aiming to open the e-file for a direct attack on the centralized king. Black tried to counter by moving the knight from f6 to g4, attacking the bishop on h6. However, this move only accelerated the finish. White delivered queen to h8 check, followed by queen to g7, and finally queen to f8, delivering checkmate. Even when black plays natural moves in the Haxo Gambit, they can quickly fall into serious trouble if they are not careful. One of the most common mistakes is allowing pawn to capture on c3. While this may seem like a safe, natural move to regain material, it actually opens the door to devastating tactics. After this, white can launch a powerful combination. Bishop takes f7, followed by queen to d5, creating a double threat against the exposed king and the bishop on c5. This sequence often leaves black with a completely exposed king and leads to a strong advantage, if not a swift checkmate. If black chooses to avoid capturing on c3, they may try to develop their knight to f6 and prepare to castle. In such positions, white's best response is to castle kingside, a flexible move that safely brings the rook into play and keeps the pressure on. Immediate attempts to capture the pawn on d4 may appear strong because they attack the bishop on c5 and push forward pawns, but they do not create the same decisive tactical opportunities. Waiting for black to make a misstep naturally often leads to a more powerful and lasting advantage. Black can attempt to defend temporarily with bishop to b4, giving a check that forces the king to move. This can transpose the game into a more standard Italian game setup, but even here, white remains comfortable. Once black is no longer able to give this check, pawn to d4 becomes a genuine threat, challenging the bishop on c5, threatening to displace the knight on c6, and opening central lines for white's pieces. Capturing on e4 can also backfire for black, as white can recapture and build a strong attack along the e-file, coordinating rooks and the queen. In most games, black eventually captures on c3 because it seems like the most natural move. At this point, white can advance pawn to e5, attacking the knight on f6. When the knight moves, black falls into the core trap of the Haxo Gambit. White then executes the classic combination. Bishop takes f7, king takes f7, and queen to d5, creating a powerful double attack. White regains the bishop on the next move, while black's king remains exposed and centralized, making it extremely vulnerable to coordinated attacks. Another strong idea is knight to g5, giving a check to the king. Since the knight is supported by the bishop on c1, black cannot capture it with the queen, forcing the king to move. Most often, black instinctively plays king to g8, attempting to hide in the corner, but without the rook on f8, the king is far from safe. White can then continue with queen to d5, threatening to regain the bishop and setting up a decisive queen to f7 checkmate.